Welcome to Karma Chronicles. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin. My name is Claire. I'm 42 years old, and I've spent the last 20 years of my life trying to forget a house. A house that used to feel like home. A house filled with the sound of my grandfather's laughter, the smell of his old pipe smoke, and the comfort of knowing someone always had your back. But now, standing in front of it, it felt like a stranger's house. My grandfather's house, my childhood home, was no longer mine. I took a deep breath as I looked up at the weathered porch. The paint had peeled away, leaving streaks of gray and brown that made it seem older than it should. The flower beds my grandmother used to tend to were overrun with weeds. The windows were shut tight, and the curtains were drawn, blocking any glimpse into the life that had once flourished inside. I knocked on the door, expecting to hear the familiar creak of the old wooden frame. But instead, there was silence. I knocked again, a little harder this time, hoping someone would answer. After a few moments, the door swung open. It wasn't the warm welcome I'd hoped for. "Claire?" Melissa's voice was colder than I remembered, almost like she had been expecting me to show up and was anything but happy about it. I tried to smile, my throat tightening as I fought back the flood of memories that threatened to overwhelm me. "Melissa, I came to see the house, to talk." She didn't let me finish. "Talk? About what exactly? You have no right to be here." She stepped back slightly, blocking the doorway with her body, her arms crossed over her chest. "This place doesn't belong to you anymore." I stared at her, confused and hurt. "I don't understand. I thought we were going to figure this out. Grandfather left it to me." Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't place. "Well, you thought wrong." She paused, her gaze sharpening. "You've been gone for 20 years, Claire. You don't get to waltz in now and act like you have any claim on this house. You don't belong here." The words stung more than I expected. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could get a word out, she turned her head slightly. "I'm calling the cops," she said, her voice flat, emotionless. "Melissa, please," I pleaded, desperation creeping into my voice. "I just want to understand. What happened? This house, it's mine. I have the papers." But she was already dialing on her phone, her back to me. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest as the reality of the situation hit me like a wave. I wasn't welcome. I never had been. When the police arrived, I was escorted off the property like a trespasser. My fingers tightened around the strap of my bag as I glanced back at the house, a place that had once been my sanctuary. I thought I could come back, find some answers, maybe even a sense of belonging. But instead, all I found was a cold door and a sister who wanted nothing to do with me. As I stood on the sidewalk, watching the door close behind me, I couldn't help but wonder what had really happened to the house, and why was Melissa so determined to keep me out? I would find out. I had to. The house wasn't just a house to me. It was a piece of my past, and no matter how hard Melissa tried to keep me away, I was going to figure out what she was hiding. The next morning, I found myself walking into the county recorder's office, feeling a mix of determination and frustration. The building was old, tucked away in a corner of the town square, with faded brick walls and windows that had clearly been there longer than anyone could remember. As I stepped through the door, the scent of stale paper and dust filled the air. I walked up to the front desk, where an older woman looked up from her computer screen. "How can I help you today?" she asked, her voice soft but professional. "I need to look up the deed for a property," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me. "The address is 1287 Oak Street. Was my grandfather's house." She nodded, tapping away at her keyboard. "Let me pull it up for you." A few moments later, she handed me a piece of paper with the property's information. I scanned it quickly, my eyes jumping to the section on ownership. The last name I expected to see, my grandfather's, was missing. Instead, the deed was transferred to someone else entirely, someone I didn't recognize. The name was written in bold letters, Raven Pines, LLC. I blinked, my fingers tightening around the paper. Raven Pines, LLC? What was that? I didn't even know what kind of entity that was, but it definitely wasn't a person. The thought of it made my stomach churn. Who was behind this LLC? Why wasn't I notified about a sale? Why hadn't my grandfather's will ever been brought up? I cleared my throat and looked up at the woman behind the desk. I don't understand. This says the house was transferred to Raven Pines, LLC. But that's not right. My grandfather left it to me. Is there any way to find out who signed this over? She paused, peering over her glasses at the paper in my hand. Well, it was signed off by someone claiming to be you, though that doesn't make sense. Now does it? She pursed her lips. And there's a notary listed here too. But I'm afraid we can't give out any further information unless you have legal authorization. I could feel the blood draining from my face. Someone signed this under my name? I never signed anything, she nodded slowly. I'd suggest you speak with a lawyer, maybe even the notary involved. This looks like it could be a case of fraud. Fraud. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind raced. How could someone possibly forge my name, and why would they? And who could be behind something like this? Before I could ask anything further, she smiled politely. Is there anything else I can help you with? I forced a tight smile, my head spinning with 1,000 questions. No, I think that's it for now. Thank you. As I left the building, I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. This wasn't just a case of a house being sold. Someone had done this deliberately. Someone had taken what was mine. And it was starting to feel like I knew exactly who was behind it. I fumbled with my phone as I walked to my car, dialing a number I hadn't called in years. Rita Morales, the voice on the other end said after a few rings. How can I help you? Rita, it's Claire. I need your help. There was a pause on the line, then a sigh. Claire, you're calling me for something serious. I can tell. I need you to look into something for me. It's about my grandfather's house. I told her everything. The transfer of the property, the LLC, the suspicious notary. When I finished, Rita was silent for a long moment. This sounds like a mess, she said finally. You know it's not going to be easy, right? But I'll help. I'll dig into it, and we'll figure out what happened. I knew I could count on you, I said, the weight of everything finally settling on my shoulders. I think Melissa is involved, but I need proof. I don't have anything to go on right now. Understood. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Just hold on. This is going to take time. I hung up and sat in my car for a moment, staring at the road ahead. I felt like I was standing at the edge of something huge, something dark. But I was going to find out what had happened to my grandfather's house, even if it meant dragging every secret out into the open. I just hoped I wasn't too late. It was a couple of days before Rita called me back. In that time, I had done little more than sit in my car, staring at the house that wasn't mine anymore, trying to make sense of what had happened. Each day I thought about what to do next, how to confront Melissa, how to untangle this web of deceit. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. Rita's voice broke through my thoughts on the third day. Claire, she said, sounding calm but serious. I've got some things for you. I sat up straighter, my heart skipping a beat. What did you find? I managed to get the name of the notary involved in the deed transfer. His name's Frank Delaney. The company that notarized it is out of town, but I tracked down Delaney's office. He's got a sketchy history, Claire, a few complaints of fraudulent activity under his belt. My stomach tightened. So he's not exactly trustworthy? Rita didn't hesitate. That's putting it lightly. I think he might have been the one who signed off on the property without you knowing. I let out a shaky breath. This was it. This was the break I needed. Do you think you could find out if he's been involved in any other shady deals? Or if there's any connection to Raven Pines LLC? I'll dig deeper, but I think the next step is clear. We need to get the original will from your grandfather. You said he left it to you, right? I nodded, even though Rita couldn't see me. Yeah, he did. But it's missing. I'm not sure where it could be. Rita's voice softened. You said you were close to your grandfather. Do you remember him mentioning anything about the will or where he kept it? I thought back to those days I spent with him in the house, long afternoons on the porch, listening to stories of his youth, the smell of his pipe filling the air. He never mentioned the will directly, but there was one thing I always remembered. He'd often said that if anything happened to him, the house was mine. It was his final wish, his one request. I remember him talking about it, I said, my voice distant. He said it would go to me, that I was the only one he trusted to keep it in the family. He even said the originals were with Reverend Mark. Rita didn't respond right away, but I could almost hear her brain working through the information. That's a lead. If Reverend Mark was trusted with the will, he's our next stop. but I can't promise he's going to just hand it over. People don't keep documents like that lying around, especially when there's a fight over them. I'll go talk to him, I said, determination in my voice. I'll figure out where it is. Good, Rita said. In the meantime, I'll keep looking into Frank Delaney and Raven Pines LLC. But be careful, Claire. If someone's willing to forge your signature and hide a will, they're not going to stop now. I hung up the phone, the weight of her warning hanging heavily in the air. I had to get the will. I had to know what my grandfather truly wanted. And if someone had been stealing from me, I was going to expose them. That afternoon, I drove to the church where Reverend Mark had served for years. It was a small, simple building on the edge of town, a place that always made me feel like I had a little piece of something bigger. I had visited Reverend Mark a few times growing up, though I hadn't spoken to him much in recent years. I parked my car and walked toward the church, the familiar stone steps beneath my feet. I took a deep breath before I knocked on the heavy wooden door. It took a moment before I heard footsteps approaching from the other side. The door creaked open, and there stood Reverend Mark, his hair grayer than I remembered, his face weathered by time but still kind. "Claire," he said, his voice warm but cautious. "It's been a long time." I nodded, trying to gather my thoughts. "Yeah, it has. I came by because I need to ask you about something important." He raised an eyebrow, stepping back to allow me inside. "Come in. Let's talk." I followed him into the church, the smell of incense and old wood filling the air. He led me into his office, a small room tucked at the back of the church, and gestured for me to sit. I didn't waste any time. "Reverend Mark, I need to know if you have the original will of my grandfather, the one he wrote before he passed." Reverend Mark's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, a brief moment of hesitation. "Your grandfather's will? I'm afraid I don't know what you're referring to, Claire." I couldn't hide the frustration in my voice. He told me before he died that he'd left the house to me and that you had the will. He trusted you with it. "I need it." Mark sat down across from me, his hands folded neatly on his desk. "Claire, I wish I could help, but I have no record of such a will. I remember your grandfather, and I remember him speaking fondly of you, but I never had any documents." "I'm sorry," I stared at him, trying to read his face. I wanted to believe him, but something about his calm demeanor didn't sit right with me. If my grandfather had truly entrusted him with something so important, surely Mark would have kept it. Wouldn't he? "Are you sure?" I pressed. "He spoke to you about it, right? You were supposed to have the originals." Mark's face remained unreadable. "I'm sorry, Claire. There's nothing I can offer you." I stood up, anger bubbling in my chest. "I don't believe you," I said sharply. "If you're hiding something, I will find it." Mark didn't flinch. "I understand you're upset, but I can only tell you the truth as I know it." I turned to leave, but before I opened the door, Mark's voice stopped me. "Claire," he said quietly, "be careful. Not all is as it seems." I didn't turn back as I walked out of the church, but his words lingered in my mind, gnawing at me. What did he know, and why was he so sure that my grandfather's will didn't exist? I had more questions than answers, and if Reverend Mark wasn't going to help me, I was going to find the answers on my own. I couldn't trust anyone, not even the people I thought I could. The pieces were out there. I just needed to put them together. The next day, I decided to take a walk through my old neighborhood. I hadn't been back in years, not since the house had slipped out of my hands, not since everything had changed. But today, I needed to see it again. Needed to remind myself of what was really mine. The walk was long, and the air was thick with humidity as I passed houses that had once been familiar. Some had been updated with modern windows and manicured lawns. Others had fallen into disrepair, with peeling paint and overgrown hedges. The whole neighborhood seemed different, like the years had weathered it beyond recognition, just like the house that was once mine. As I walked past 1287 Oak Street again, I couldn't help but stop and stare. The house was still there, standing like a relic of my past, but it was silent now, empty and barren. I could still picture the swing in the front yard, the faded rocking chairs my grandfather used to sit in, and the patch of grass where we'd have picnics on lazy summer afternoons. But today, there was nothing, just the oppressive quiet of a house that no longer belonged to me. I turned to walk back when I noticed a figure standing on the front porch of the house next door. Walt Jennings, an elderly neighbor who had lived across the street for as long as I could remember, was sitting in his usual chair, a weathered cane resting against the railing. He looked up when he saw me and gave me a small wave. "Claire," he called out, his voice as raspy as ever. "I thought I recognized you." I gave him a small smile and walked over to where he sat. Walt had always been kind to me, back when I was a kid, and even now I appreciated the familiarity of his presence. He had that warm, grandfatherly vibe that I hadn't realized I missed until now. "Walt," I said, taking a seat beside him. "How have you been?" "Oh, getting by," he said with a grin. "My knees aren't what they used to be, but I manage. How about you? It's been a while since I've seen you around." "Yeah," I replied, my voice soft. "I've been busy. Life. Just, a lot's changed." I glanced over at my old house. "I came by yesterday to take a look at the place, but things aren't how I remember." Walt's eyes flickered to the house and then back to me. He nodded slowly, his expression turning thoughtful. "No, they're not. I've been living here a long time. I've seen a lot come and go, but there's something strange about that place now. Something off." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Walt leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice, even though no one else was around to hear. "After your grandfather passed, I started noticing strange things happening. You remember the black vans, right? They'd show up at night, parked down the street. No license plates. They'd stay for hours, unloading all sorts of crates and boxes into the house. No one ever came in or out during the day, just at night. It was always a bit odd." My pulse quickened. "What kind of crates?" I asked. My curiosity piqued. Walt rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "I couldn't say for sure, but they were big. Wooden crates, like the kind you'd ship furniture in. I couldn't see inside, of course, but it didn't look like normal moving stuff. It looked like they were hiding something." I leaned in closer, eager to hear more. "Did you see who was behind it? Who was taking the crates?" Walt shook his head slowly. "No, I never saw anyone clearly. But there was one man, a tall guy, always in a dark jacket. Would park his van close to the house, and after a while, I started seeing him around again, more frequently. He talked to Melissa. I'm pretty sure it was her husband, Brian, right? Melissa's husband. That was a name I had been hearing more often lately, but never with good connotations. Something about Brian always seemed off. He was charming enough, but there was something in the way he carried himself, the way he spoke to people, like he was always one step ahead, always with a plan. I hadn't trusted him from the beginning. Walt's voice brought me back to the present. "I'm telling you, Claire, something's been going on with that house ever since your grandfather died. It's not just the place, it's the people around it. Something's wrong." I let his words sink in. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that information, Walt," I said quietly, frustration bubbling up inside me. "I've been trying to figure out what happened to the house, what's going on, but every time I turn around there's more mystery and less truth." Walt gave me a sympathetic look. "I get it, I really do. But if you want answers, you're going to have to dig deeper. I can't help you any more than I already have, but maybe I can give you something that might help." I looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "I kept some of the old zoning permits for the area," Walt said, standing up slowly. "Back when your grandfather was still alive, he made a few adjustments to the property. Nothing big, but it might help you figure out what's changed. Maybe those crates, maybe they were shipping something that wasn't supposed to be there." I stood up quickly. "Where are they?" He grinned and shuffled into his house, returning a moment later with a thick stack of old papers. "Here, I kept them in case anyone ever asked questions. Looks like someone's starting to ask, huh?" I took the papers from him, feeling the weight of the moment. "Thanks, Walt. This means a lot." He waved it off, his face serious for the first time. "Just be careful, Claire. There are people involved in this. People who don't want anyone poking around." I nodded, tucking the papers under my arm. As I turned to leave, Walt called out to me once more. "Claire," he said, his voice low, "I may not know much, but I know one thing. If something's going on with that house, your sister's involved. She might be playing innocent, but I think she knows more than she's letting on." I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding. I wasn't sure if I was ready to confront Melissa yet, but Walt's words rang in my head as I walked back to my car. He was right about one thing. There was something deeper here, something I hadn't seen before. Melissa wasn't just hiding behind silence, she was hiding something, and I was going to find out what. The papers Walt gave me were crumpled in my hand as I drove back to my apartment. I hadn't even looked at them yet. My mind was too focused on what I had learned in the past few hours. Melissa, Brian, the strange activity at the house, the hidden crates. Something was happening that I still couldn't fully understand, but I was determined to. I parked my car in front of my building and sat for a moment, just staring at the steering wheel. My hands were shaking slightly. I wasn't scared, not yet, but the uncertainty, the sheer unknown of it all, was starting to feel heavy. I grabbed the stack of papers from the passenger seat, still tucked under my arm like they were a lifeline. They felt like they carried something important, something that could break the whole situation open. I had to go through them, piece everything together. Inside my apartment, I sat at my small kitchen table and spread the papers out before me. Zoning permits, property adjustments, small notes about renovations and minor repairs. There were a few things I didn't quite understand, technical jargon about building codes and permits for utility changes. But one thing stood out to me. There were new building codes attached to the property that didn't match up with the house itself. In one of the permits, it clearly stated that a section of the house had been repurposed for commercial use. Commercial use? My heart skipped a beat. Was this even legal? And why would my grandfather have done this? As I continued to flip through the papers, one document caught my eye. It was a change of use permit, but it didn't list my grandfather's name as the applicant. It was under Raven Pines LLC. The date on the form matched the time when my grandfather had passed away. My stomach dropped. My grandfather's house was being turned into something else, something under the control of that LLC. That wasn't right. It didn't make sense. I leaned back in my chair, running my fingers through my hair. What had my grandfather gotten involved in? And why hadn't I known about any of this? Had he been coerced? Had he been tricked? Or worse, had he been forced into signing something he didn't understand? The weight of it was suffocating. I picked up my phone, glancing at the contact list, and found Rita's name. She had to know what this meant. She had to be able to make sense of all this legal jargon. I dialed her number. "Claire, what's up?" Rita answered, her voice steady as always. "I've got a problem," I said, my voice tight. "I need your help. I found something in the paperwork. It's bad. I don't know what it all means yet, but I think Raven Pines LLC is tied to my grandfather's house, and the property was reclassified to something commercial. I need you to look into it." There was a pause on the other end. "Commercial use. That's serious. I'll need to look into it, but it's going to take some time." "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure," I said, standing up from my chair and pacing the small space of my apartment. "I've got paperwork here that shows Raven Pines LLC is connected to the house. This isn't just a transfer of ownership. It's a complete change of what the house is supposed to be. I think they've been hiding something from me. From all of us." Rita exhaled slowly. "Okay, I'll get to work. Don't do anything rash yet. Keep your head down, Claire. This could get messy, especially if someone's involved in hiding this stuff." "I know," I muttered. "But I'm not backing down now. I have to find out what's really going on." I ended the call and sat down at the table again, looking over the documents with fresh eyes. There had to be more to this. Something I was missing. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Melissa. "We need to talk." I stared at the message for a long moment, my fingers itching to type something back. Anything to confront her with what I'd learned. But I hesitated. If I texted her now, if I confronted her too soon, I might scare her off. No, I needed more, something concrete that would tie her to all this. I put my phone down and looked back at the papers, searching for any clue that might lead me closer to the truth. Then, something caught my eye. A piece of paper that had slipped out of the pile. A single sheet that I hadn't noticed before, hidden behind one of the permits. It was a letter typed in bold professional font. It had no return address, just a name at the bottom. Brian Harper. I quickly read through it, and my blood ran cold. The letter was addressed to Raven Pines LLC, but it wasn't just a business letter. It was a demand. The text was formal, almost too formal, but the language was clear. Brian was requesting a full transfer of the house. There were mentions of large sums of money, references to future investments, and repurposing the property for high-value business deals. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This wasn't just about Melissa. This was about her husband, Brian, manipulating everything behind the scenes. And now I had the proof. I snapped a picture of the letter with my phone and sent it to Rita with a quick message. This is bigger than I thought. I think Brian's involved. I need your help to take this to the next level. I stood up from the table, my hands shaking. I was close, closer than I had ever been to the truth. But I still didn't know how deep this went. Brian wasn't just a passive player in all this. He was the one pulling the strings. I was going to have to confront him soon. But first, I had to make sure everything was in place. There was no going back now. I wasn't just going to get the house back. I was going to expose everything. The following days blurred together in a haze of research and phone calls. I spent every waking moment trying to piece together the mystery of Raven Pines LLC, Brian's involvement, and the truth behind my grandfather's will. Rita worked tirelessly in the background, pulling every legal thread she could find, but the more we uncovered, the darker it all became. I sat in my living room, surrounded by a mountain of papers, my laptop open in front of me with a series of legal documents on the screen. I ran my fingers through my hair, trying to focus. It was all starting to come together, but the weight of everything was starting to press down on me. This wasn't just a family dispute. This was a full-on battle for something I had a right to, and the people involved would stop at nothing to keep it. My phone buzzed on the table, and I picked it up without thinking. It was a message from Rita. I've got a breakthrough. It's bigger than I thought. We need to talk. My heart skipped a beat. I quickly dialed her number, my pulse quickening as the phone rang. Claire, Rita's voice came through, tense but controlled. I don't think you fully understand the scope of what we're dealing with here. I dug into the LLC. Raven Pines is registered under a different name than you'd expect. It's a shell company tied to a group of investors. And guess who's linked to the top of the chain? My stomach twisted. Who? Brian, she said simply, her tone heavy. But not just Brian. He's the public face of it. But there's someone pulling the strings behind him, someone much more powerful. I leaned back in my chair, a sick feeling settling in my gut. So Brian's not working alone? Not even close, Rita confirmed. I traced the investors back to a group of business moguls who have been involved in multiple shady deals over the years. Some of them have ties to money laundering. This isn't just about the house, Claire. They're trying to cover up a much bigger operation, and your grandfather's property is part of that. I felt like the world around me was shifting, as if the ground beneath my feet had suddenly become unstable. I had known something was wrong, but this was a whole new level of danger. How do we fight this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm not going to lie, Claire, Rita said, her tone hardening. This is going to be a battle, but we have leverage. I'm sending you over everything I've found. We have proof of fraud, money laundering, and, if I can get more details, some pretty serious criminal activity. But it's going to take time. We can't rush into this. I squeezed my phone tightly, trying to steady my nerves. We don't have much time, Rita. They're moving fast. I can't just sit here and let them take everything. I need to move on this now. Rita was silent for a moment before she spoke again. I understand, but listen, Claire. If you're going to do this, you need to stay calm. If you confront Melissa and Brian too soon, they'll bury the evidence and you'll be left with nothing. We need to play this smart. We need to hit them with the legal right hook when they least expect it. My heart hammered in my chest. You think I can trust Melissa? There was a long pause on the line before Rita responded. I don't know, but I do know this. If you're going to confront them, you need more than just the evidence. You need to make them feel like they have no way out. I took a deep breath, pushing the anxiety aside. I'm ready. Good, I'll gather everything I have and we'll put together a plan. But keep your head cool, Claire. You can't let your emotions guide you, not this time. I won't. I'll wait for your call. Just make sure we have everything, Rita. I ended the call, setting the phone down on the table. I stared at the stack of papers in front of me, everything suddenly feeling so much heavier. There were days when I wondered if it would be easier to just walk away, leave the past behind, and forget it ever happened. But I couldn't. I couldn't leave my grandfather's legacy in the hands of people who were only out for themselves. I wasn't going to let them win. I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. I reviewed everything Rita had sent me, trying to commit the details to memory. My hands shook as I went over the documents again and again, memorizing names, dates, and transactions. I wasn't going to let them pull this off. I would expose everything, no matter what it took. By the time the sun began to set, I was exhausted but resolute. I knew what I had to do. I texted Melissa back, my fingers hovering over the keyboard for a moment before I typed out a short message. "We need to talk, face to face, now." I hit send and leaned back in my chair, waiting for the response. I didn't know if she would take the bait or not, but if she did, I was ready. The game was on. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I went over everything one last time, putting together a strategy, mentally rehearsing the conversation I would have with Melissa and Brian. I was prepared for them to deny everything, to lie and manipulate, but I wasn't backing down. The stakes had gotten higher. This was no longer just about a house. It was about everything I had fought for, everything I had lost, and I wasn't about to let them take it from me. At 9:45 p.m., my phone buzzed with a response from Melissa. "Fine. Meet me at the house tomorrow at 2. I swallowed hard, feeling my pulse quicken. Tomorrow, I was going to get answers. I was going to take back what was mine. And nothing, not even Melissa or Brian, was going to stop me. The following week passed in a blur of preparation and tense anticipation. Rita and I worked through every detail of our case. The evidence was piling up: fraudulent documents, forged signatures, shady dealings, and illegal transactions, all pointing back to Raven Pines LLC and ultimately to Brian. It felt surreal. I was fighting a battle I never imagined I'd be in, one that was as much about family betrayal as it was about legality. I didn't sleep much. My thoughts were consumed by what was coming next, by the way this could end. But no matter what happened, I was resolved. I wasn't going to let them take everything from me. On the day of the hearing, I stood outside the courtroom, my stomach in knots. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but now that it was real, it felt like the weight of everything was pressing down on me. I knew I had the evidence, and I knew I had Rita on my side, but I wasn't prepared for the emotional toll this would take. I took a deep breath and pushed through the courtroom doors. My heels clicked against the tile floor as I walked past the rows of empty benches. The tension in the room was palpable. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, was already seated at the bench, flipping through paperwork. She barely looked up as I made my way to the front, but I could feel her eyes on me as I took my place at the plaintiff's table. Rita stood next to me, her expression calm but determined. She had been my rock throughout this entire process, and now, as the case was about to begin, I couldn't help but feel a little bit of gratitude for her quiet confidence. I glanced over at the defense table, and my heart sank when I saw Melissa and Brian. They sat next to their attorney, the one they'd hired, who looked like he was fresh out of law school. Brian was leaning back in his chair, his arms crossed in a way that suggested he was already confident that this would all blow over. Melissa, on the other hand, had her usual carefully curated look, hair perfectly done, makeup flawless, and a face set in a tight, practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. I clenched my jaw and turned my focus back to the judge. The proceedings began, and I listened carefully as the lawyer for the defense spoke first, outlining their argument. He was smooth, confident, and full of legal jargon. It almost made me sick to listen to him spin lies so effortlessly. He painted a picture of Melissa as a loving, responsible daughter who had simply been trying to take care of a property that was falling apart. According to him, there was no fraud. There was no wrongdoing, just a misunderstanding. I could see Melissa nodding along with everything he said, her gaze occasionally flicking toward me with an expression that was a mix of contempt and mild amusement. When it was our turn, Rita stood and addressed the court with calm authority. "Your Honor," she began, her voice firm, "we have proof that the property in question was fraudulently transferred under Claire's name. The deed was signed by someone claiming to be Claire, but we've established that no such signature was ever made. Furthermore, Raven Pines LLC, a shell corporation tied to the defendants, has been involved in illegal activities, and we have every reason to believe that they were behind the fraudulent transaction." She gestured to the pile of documents in front of us. These documents clearly show discrepancies in the property's transaction. We also have records of payments made by Claire to maintain the property, including the mortgage. All of this points to a deliberate attempt to strip Claire of her rightful inheritance. I could feel the eyes of the courtroom on me as Rita continued, but I couldn't focus on that. My eyes were locked on Brian. He looked unnervingly calm, but I could see the way his fingers gripped the edge of the table. There was a hint of tension in his jaw that betrayed the mask he was trying to wear. When Rita finished, the judge addressed the defense lawyer, giving him the floor. The attorney stood up, trying to counter our claims, but his argument was weak, filled with holes. He kept repeating that this was all a misunderstanding, that the signature was legitimate, that Melissa was merely trying to protect the property in her father's absence. But there was no evidence to support his claims, and I could see the cracks starting to show in his argument. The defense lawyer's eyes flicked nervously between his clients as Rita called her first witness, a notary who had been involved in the signing of the deed. The notary confirmed what we already knew, that the signature in question was forged, that he had never seen Claire in person when the documents were signed. The room went silent as the notary's testimony sank in. Then it was time for me to testify. I stood up slowly, my legs shaky as I walked to the witness stand. My hands gripped the edges of the wooden chair in front of me, trying to steady my nerves. I had prepared for this moment, but the reality of speaking under oath made my pulse race. Rita asked me simple questions at first. What I remembered about my grandfather, about the house, and about the will he had left for me. It felt like a lifetime ago, but I spoke with clarity, explaining my grandfather's wishes, the promises he had made to me. And then Rita led me to the question I had been dreading. Claire, Rita asked, her voice calm, when did you first learn that the property had been transferred out of your name? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I learned about it when I tried to visit the house, I said, my voice firm. I knocked on the door, expecting a warm welcome from my sister. Instead, I was told to leave. I was told I had no right to be there. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, and I felt the eyes of everyone in the courtroom on me. But I didn't break. I pushed forward. The deed to the house had been transferred to Raven Pines LLC, but I never signed any papers. My name was forged. I was being shut out of my inheritance by my own sister. The defense lawyer tried to interrupt, but the judge silenced him with a sharp glance. I kept going, recounting the conversations I'd had with Melissa, the way she had dismissed me when I asked about the house. I told the court about the mysterious vans Walt had seen outside the house, about the way my sister had been acting ever since our grandfather died. The weight of the words felt heavier with each passing moment, but I didn't look back. When I was finished, I sat down, my hands trembling. I felt the weight of the room on me, and for a moment, I wondered if I had said too much. But I had told the truth. I had done what I came to do. Rita stood, addressing the judge one final time. Your Honor, we have proven that Claire's signature was forged and that the property was transferred under fraudulent circumstances. We ask that the court rule in favor of Claire's rightful claim to the house, and that the defendants be held accountable for their actions. I held my breath as the judge deliberated. It felt like hours passed in that tense silence. Finally, she spoke. After reviewing the evidence, I find the defendants guilty of document tampering and fraud. The property shall be returned to Claire, and the defendants will be subject to further investigation for their involvement in illegal activities. A wave of relief washed over me, but it was bittersweet. I had won. But the fight wasn't over. Not yet. As I walked out of the courtroom, Rita by my side, I felt the weight of everything lifting off my shoulders. It wasn't the end, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had a chance at getting everything back. The house was mine again, but I knew that what had happened there and what I'd uncovered would never let me go. Not until I knew the whole truth. A few days after the ruling, I found myself standing in front of the house again. My heart a mix of triumph and something else, something deeper, something more complicated. The front porch still looked weathered, the paint chipped, the garden overtaken by wild plants that my grandfather would have never allowed. But now it was mine again. I reached for the old brass doorknob, my fingers brushing against the cold metal as if testing the reality of it all. I had the papers. The court had declared it mine. But something about standing here in front of the house made the victory feel empty. I opened the door slowly, the hinges creaking as I stepped inside. The smell of dust and old wood hit me immediately, but underneath it, I could still sense my grandfather's presence. It was faint, but it was there. The familiar smell of his old pipe, the worn leather armchair where he used to sit every evening, reading his newspapers and telling me stories about the world when he was young. The house, though empty, still felt like home. But it wasn't the same. It never would be again. I walked through the living room, running my hand along the back of the couch, the soft fabric still familiar under my fingertips. The old lamp in the corner flickered as I walked by, as if welcoming me back. My eyes wandered to the pictures on the wall, family portraits, photos of my grandfather in his younger years, pictures of me as a child, smiling, carefree. But all I could feel now was the weight of the years, the silence, and the lies that had come with them. I moved toward the kitchen, where I had spent so many hours sitting at the table, eating meals with my grandfather, listening to his stories. But now the room felt cold. The cupboards were empty and the countertops were barren. It was as if no one had lived here in years, despite it only being a few days since the ruling. I walked to the back door, looking out into the overgrown backyard. The swing my grandfather had built for me was still there, though it looked worn and unused. The fence, once sturdy and strong, was now leaning at odd angles. Nature had taken over in a way that seemed almost deliberate, like it was trying to reclaim the land that had been taken from it. I stepped outside, breathing in the cool air. The wind rustled through the leaves of the overgrown trees. The sound of the wind through the branches, familiar, soothing. For a moment, I closed my eyes and remembered how it used to be. How the house felt alive with the sound of my grandfather's laughter, the way he would hum his old tunes while working in the garden. But now it was just a house, a structure, a place that no longer held the warmth of the memories it once contained. I pulled myself away from the backyard and walked back inside, my footsteps echoing through the empty house. I made my way up the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. I paused outside the door to my grandfather's room. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see the outline of his old rocking chair in the corner. I pushed the door open, stepping inside. The room was just as I remembered. Unmade bed, the faded quilt draped over it. The chair by the window where he used to sit, staring out at the world as if reflecting on everything that had come before. The shelves were lined with books, some of them old, some of them tattered, but all of them filled with knowledge. I reached for the rocking chair, running my fingers along its smooth wood. It creaked as I sat down, the sound of it bringing back memories of those quiet nights spent with my grandfather. But it was all gone now, wasn't it? The house, the memories, everything that had once been familiar. It all felt so distant. I had won back the house, but I couldn't win back the past. I stood up and walked to the small desk where my grandfather used to keep his papers, his letters, his notes. I opened the drawer, hoping to find something, anything that would give me a clue about what had really happened. But the drawer was empty, nothing, no hidden letters, no final message, just a void where once there had been something important. I closed the drawer gently, feeling the weight of it all. There was no new revelation, no letter that explained everything. There was only me, sitting in the house that once felt like home, but now felt like a stranger. I walked back down the stairs and out the front door, my heart heavy with the realization that the house, despite being mine again, was never going to be the same. I stood in front of the house one last time, looking at the cracked porch and the broken fence. I could feel the weight of my grandfather's memory pressing down on me. This house had been his, but it wasn't just his. It was mine, too. It was part of my history, part of my family, but I didn't want to move back in. I didn't think I ever could. There were too many ghosts here, too much pain wrapped up in every corner of this place. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small plaque I had brought with me. It was simple, just a wooden plaque, with my grandfather's name engraved on it. I walked to the porch and affixed it to the post, where it would be visible to anyone who passed by. It wasn't much, but it was something. A tribute to the man who had once filled this house with love and laughter. A reminder that no matter what had happened, this place would always be part of our family's history. I stepped back and looked at the plaque, my eyes stinging with unshed tears. I had fought for the house. I had fought for the truth. But in the end, the real treasure wasn't in the walls of this house. It was in the memories, the lessons, and the love that my grandfather had given me. Lessons I would carry with me, no matter where I went. I took one last look at the house, then turned and walked away, leaving behind the past but carrying its lessons with me. The house would stand, but I was done trying to make it fit into a life that was no longer mine. It was time to move on. And with that, I left the house behind,